Welcome to the Holocaust Center for Humanities Lunch and Learn program. I'm Alana Cohn-Kennedy, the Holocaust Center's Chief Operating Officer. As people are joining, please take a moment to let us know where you are joining from in the chat. When we talk of the Holocaust, often we are describing life and images from Jews in Central and Eastern Europe, shtetls in Poland, or assimilated Jews in Germany and France. Today, we are going to hear about the Jewish communities in the area of today's Greece and how their experiences varied in so many ways from those in Central and Eastern Europe. As we wrap up our last Lunch and Learn program of 2024, and don't worry, there are more to come in 2025, I want to thank you all for being part of this community that craves learning, that loves a good story, and appreciates an opportunity to delve into history and see how it shapes our world today. Looking back on 2024, I want to share with you a few milestones. In the 2023 to 24 school year, over 23,000 students in our state interacted with our resources and programs. 23,000. One student wrote, "After this field trip, I have a greater understanding of the Holocaust. By ignoring hateful, racist comments towards others, hatred can grow and become worse." In 2024, the numbers of visitors to the Holocaust Center increased by 48%. And we started these Lunch and Learn programs back in 2020. Shout out to those of you who are watching and who have been with us since the very beginning. This program is our 122nd program. Since that time, these programs have been watched live and online over 94,000 times. These programs and this incredible outreach and impact is possible because of our generous donors and you. We couldn't do this without your support. So as we approach the end of the year, please consider the Holocaust Center in your year-end giving so that we can continue doing this work and do even more. If you've already given, thank you so much. And if you would like to support this program and the work we are doing at the Holocaust Center, please click on the link in the chat or go to our website. We are very fortunate to have with us today one of the world's leading scholars in Sephardic Studies, Dr. Devin Naar. Born and raised in New Jersey, Dr. Naar received his PhD in history at Stanford University. He served as a Fulbright Fellow to Greece and is the author of several award-winning books, including Jewish Salonica Between the Ottoman Empire and Modern Greece, which won the 2016 National Book Award. As the chair of the Sephardic Studies program of the Strom Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Washington, Dr. Naar spearheaded a project to collect and disseminate the rich Sephardic and Ladino historical, literary, and cultural heritage. Dr. Naar led the creation of the first major online Sephardic Studies digital library and archive, comprised of more than 1,500 artifacts, books, and letters collected from residents of the Seattle area and across the country. Devin Naar is currently an associate professor of history and Jewish studies and chair of the Sephardic Studies program at the University of Washington. He teaches courses about Jewish history, Sephardic studies, the history and memory of the Holocaust, antisemitism, and race and migration in American history. Devin, we are so pleased to have you with us today. We will take questions at the end of the program, but please feel free to type your questions in at any time into the Q&A feature on Zoom. Thank you so much, Devin. I will turn the program over to you.
Thank you very much, Alana. It's really a pleasure and a great opportunity for me to be here with you all. And it's nice to see so many people signed up today and participants from the Washington State area and across the country, and even some folks from abroad. And I'm very happy to be participating in what seems like very, very active set of programs that you've had over this year, Alana. So thank you for including me toward the end of the calendar year here. I'd like to jump right in to our story about Sephardic Jews and the Holocaust. And in order to do so, I'd like to go ahead and share my screen so that we can get some visuals and some audio going as well. The title of my talk is From the Ottoman Empire to Auschwitz, the Untold Story of Sephardic Jews and the Holocaust. And it's not so much that the story is not completely untold, but it's still not really well integrated into our consciousness in the United States as it relates to Holocaust history and memory, as Alana alluded to, or into even the academic study of the Holocaust, of the many, many, many books that have been written dealing with the Holocaust. The Mediterranean world still is not well represented in those accounts. And it's not just in the scholarship or in individual interactions, but it's also profoundly in personal experiences and in collective memory. I remember when I was a student over 20 years ago, I was participating in a Holocaust commemoration program at my university, and one of the organizers came to me before the program began, and this was going to be, lighting of the candles to reflect the victims of the Holocaust. And she asked me, what my connection to the Holocaust was, and I explained that my grandfather's brother and his spouse and children were killed during the Holocaust in Auschwitz. And she asked me, well, where were they from? And I said, Salonica, Greece. And this was an older woman. She paused. She looked at me, said, that can't be. I'm a survivor of Auschwitz, and I never met a Jew from Greece. And that was a really shocking encounter for me. It was a sort of unintentional Holocaust denial, but a denial nonetheless of somebody very closely associated with Jewish community life and with Holocaust memory. And so that provoked me to delve deeper into trying to understand not only the experiences of Jews in Greece and the Mediterranean during the Holocaust, but also to understand the absence of that story in our collective memory. I wish that at the time I had been able to point to a phenomenon that was taking place at Auschwitz itself, exactly that same year where I participated in that Holocaust commemoration program. And at Auschwitz itself, there was in 2003 an unveiling of a new plaque that was installed at Auschwitz. And I know perhaps some of you have been to Auschwitz before. There are about 20 different plaques in languages of the victims of the Holocaust displayed at the camp there. But there was no plaque in Judeo-Spanish, in Ladino, in the language of the Sephardic Jews of Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean. And it required a concerted campaign of a survivor, Chaim Vidal Seficha, who was of a Ladino-speaking family that wound up in Belgium, who lobbied for several years, the Auschwitz Museum, to incorporate a plaque in the language of the Sephardic Jews. In the 60s, plaques were installed in Yiddish and in Hebrew and in German and in Polish and in Dutch and in Greek, but not Judeo-Spanish. And so in 2003, the plaque was finally unveiled, reflecting the status of Sephardic Jews among the victims of the Holocaust and of Auschwitz in particular. This is what it says. And if you understand Spanish, or if you know Ladino, certainly you will be able to comprehend this. Que este lugar donde los nazis exterminaron 1,500,000 de hombres, de mujeres y de criaturas, la más parte judíos de varios países de la Europa, sea para siempre, para la humanidad, un grito de desespero y unas señales. May this place where the Nazis exterminated 1.5 million men, women, and children, for the most part Jews, from various countries of Europe, notice we have a Eurocentric framing here, may it be forever for humanity a cry of despair and a sign. Okay. Now, at the unveiling of this plaque, there was also a beautiful Judeo-Spanish or Ladino song that was sung. And I want to give you a sense of that song, and we'll talk about it for a moment. It's called Árboles lloran por lluvias. Trees cry for rain.
Árboles lloran por lluvias y montañas
And the song is understood at the first level as a love song. Someone goes away, misses the person with whom they're in love, and fears that in foreign lands they will surely die. On a second level, the song speaks about the relationship between the Sephardim, the Sephardic Jews exiled from Spain in 1492, and their sense of connection with the geography from which they came. The idea that outside of Iberia, outside of the Iberian Peninsula, these people, exiled people, will die. But in the context of the Holocaust, as Jews were being deported to the camps from the Balkans in the 1940s, it is said that some of them transformed the lyrics of the song to make it reflect their current devastating circumstances. Instead of saying, en tierras ajenas, yo me voy a morir, in foreign lands, I will surely die, they sung instead, en tierras de Polonia, in the lands of Poland, I will surely die, because it's to there where they were deported, and it was there where many of the Jewish communities of Ladino-speaking background were exterminated during the Holocaust. But when we think about the Holocaust, and we think about the map, what is the map of the Holocaust, the extent? We think of Germany, we think of Eastern Europe. These are the geographies that are essentially synonymous with the Holocaust. Check out the framing of this map at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Notice that it cuts through Greece here, and it excludes a place that I would argue is crucial for our understanding of the Holocaust, and that is the Island of Rhodes, which would be like right about here, just off the map. And it had been home to a small but important Ladino-speaking Jewish community of a couple of thousand people. And in the summer, in July of 1944, as the war was changing, it had turned, and it was clear that the Nazis were already going to be losing the war. Nonetheless, Hitler and the Nazi command sent resources, troops, allocated personnel to travel all the way to this remote island of Rhodes, which had been part of the Italian Empire at the time, and before that, the Ottoman Empire, to round up and deport the Jews of Rhodes. You can see mainland Turkey from the island of Rhodes. It's about 11 miles away. The Jews from Rhodes, about 1,700, were rounded up and brought in ships through the Aegean Sea to the port of Piraeus by Athens, and then from there sent by rail up to Salonica, through the Balkans, to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where they were exterminated in the summer of 1944. 1944, the summer of 1944. If you do not include Rhodes in your understanding of the Holocaust, you do not understand the Holocaust. You do not understand the scope of the Holocaust. You do not understand the geographic reach of the Holocaust. You do not understand the range of Jewish cultures destroyed by the Holocaust, and you do not understand the extent to which, for Hitler, exterminating the Jews, completing the final solution, was more important than winning the war. So those are several of the reasons why a Mediterranean view of the Holocaust, I suggest, is central to comprehending the Holocaust as an event itself. And this map doesn't even begin to explain the expanse and the reach of the Nazi forces. And we'd have to do a completely another talk to talk about the impact of the Nazi forces and anti-Semitic legislation in North Africa. And there's a great book by Sarah Stein and Omar Baum on the Holocaust in North Africa, which I would recommend that you check out. But Jews were impacted by the Holocaust in French colonial North Africa, in which there were camps and labor camps. So the geography of the Holocaust is vast. Its echoes and impacts were tremendous. I want to focus our time today on one place in particular, not only because it was the largest of the Ladino-speaking Sephardic Jewish communities in the Mediterranean, but also because it was the city from which my own family came. And that is the city of Salonika or Thessaloniki in today's northern Greece. The city, by the way, you can see it here on the map, right here, Salonika, northern Greece. Okay. This is my family. Can you guess which one is my grandfather? This guy, the little boy here. This is his parents, Chacham or Rabbi Benjamin Naar. This is my great-grandmother, Rachel Nefusi Naar, and these are my most of my grandfather's siblings. This is my great-grandmother. This is actually likely their visa photograph that they used to come to the United States, partly illegally in 1924, with the exception of the oldest brother, whom I mentioned, who remained behind. The truth is he had been in the United States and then returned and then could not get a visa to get out. Growing up, I didn't really know all of the details of my family's story. In fact, it wasn't clear to me where Tio Salomon, where Uncle Solomon and his family had perished. And it was as a result of that encounter at the Holocaust commemoration that really provoked me to dive deeper into the family story and try to uncover clues about what happened to the branch of the family that remained behind. And asking around in the family, one of my great uncles, one day, he said, "Oh yeah, we have some documents that might help you." And he pulled out a stack of letters. They looked like this. And he said, "Here, if you could figure out what these say, maybe you'll find out more about what happened to Uncle Solomon." And what could I understand of this letter? Well, here is the date and the place, Thessaloniki, November 27, 1945. But I'm looking at this document and I said, what is this language here? And my relatives, they said, "Oh, well, this is Spanish." They said, "Oh, come on, this is not Spanish. Look at that. Those are little crazy curly cues there. I can't read that." He says, no, this is our Spanish. This is our Ladino. This is how we used to write our Spanish in special Hebrew letters here. And I asked, "Can you read it?" No, nobody could remember how to read it. So I went to the library and I found an old chart of Sephardic Hebrew script. It took a very long time to find such a chart. And I sat there decoding the letter, character by character, trying to figure out what the letters say, because the letters were dated in the 1930s, and then the last one was 1940, and then there was a gap. And they pick up in 1945, 1946, 1947. So I figured, okay, if I could figure out what these letters say, maybe my relatives were right. I'll be able to understand more about what happened to Tio Salomon, to Uncle Solomon and his family. And I remember the first word I could comprehend was this one here. If anybody knows the Hebrew alphabet, maybe you can guess what the letters are here. And this is Hebrew, so it goes right to left. Anybody know Hebrew, want to put what letter they think this is in the alphabet here? The Hebrew alphabet? Put it in the chat if you want to take a guess at what letter that is. Maybe some of you know. This next letter, this first letter here is an Aleph, but it doesn't look like the modern Israeli or contemporary American Jewish Aleph, because the way that we write Hebrew script today is actually the Ashkenazi style of Hebrew script. Each geography and culture had its own way of representing Hebrew characters, and there were differences in the Mediterranean and the Central and Northern European environments. So this word turned out to be Almanes, which means Germans. And I was like, okay, if I can figure this out, I'll get a better sense of what happened. And it turns out that this letter was written by a family friend, or possibly a relative, because he shared the last name of my great-grandmother. His name was Ino Nefusi, and he writes in the beginning of this letter, "Muy caro Jajam Benjamin, puede ser que se va a maravillar de recibir novedades de mi parte. Yo tenía intención de escribirle desde mucho tiempo, mas no tenía ganas de verme a mí, no quise amargarlo a él también. Veramente non sé cuál decirle en esta letra. Estoy tanto harvado y triste que me hace mucho mal de recontar la tragedia muy fuerte que se abatió sobre nosotros." What was the tragedy that befell the Jews of Salonika? And in order to understand the extent of that tragedy, we are going to focus not only on the destruction, but we are going to focus first on the life and the world that was destroyed. Because only if you comprehend the vibrancy of Jewish life in places like Salonika can you appreciate the devastation of the destruction. If we go to Salonika over 100 years ago at the beginning of the 20th century, we are speaking about a bustling urban port city on the Aegean Sea connected to the Mediterranean world of the Ottoman Empire, in which Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived together under the framework of the Ottoman Empire, ruled from Istanbul by the Sultan. And this was not a world necessarily of equal rights until really the late 19th century, but it was a world of toleration, a world in which Jews, as non-Muslims, could practice their religion, speak their language, and organize their communities in exchange for special taxes. And this was a different environment than obtained in other parts of Europe at the time. One of the unique factors of Salonika was the disproportionately large Jewish presence. Perhaps half, even more than half of the population of the city were Ladino-speaking Sephardic Jews at the turn of the 20th century. Their influence was so profound that the entire city, the port, the markets closed every week in observance of the Sabbath. From Friday night to Saturday night, ports could essentially not arrive at the port. Boats could not arrive at the port during the Sabbath. And what was also distinctive about the Jews of Salonika was that they could be found in every part of the city, although there were, of course, Jewish neighborhoods, but they were not forced to live there. And they could be found in every aspect of the socio-economic life of the city. The porters and the hamales, the workers at the port, the stevedores were Jews, and the customs agents were Jews, and there were teachers who were Jewish, and lawyers who were Jewish, and journalists who were Jewish, and there were rabbis, and there were merchants, and there were ice cream vendors, and lemonade sellers, and pumpkin seed merchants, and there were young women that worked in the tobacco factories, and there were gangsters, and there were prostitutes, Jewish. This led important Jewish leaders, Zionist leaders, to come and travel to the city during the late Ottoman period, including Vladimir Jabotinsky and David Ben-Gurion, who came from very different ideological perspectives on the right and on the left, but they both came to the same conclusion, essentially, that what they saw in Salonika, they hoped would one day materialize in Palestine itself, a self-governing, autonomous Jewish society. How do we go from such a space where some of the early Zionist leaders were thinking of Salonika as a model for an independent Jewish homeland to a space in which the Jewish community would be completely decimated? Greece had one of the highest mortality rates of any country in occupied Europe, second only to Poland. And it's not that there were tons and tons of Jews in Greece. Maybe there were 100,000 maximum, most of whom were in Salonika. But I want to suggest, when we think about the impact of the German occupation, we have to understand the local factors. The local factors shaped the trajectory and the fate of Jews across occupied Europe. And this is a key characteristic to focus on that helps us explain what happened in Poland versus what happened in France or Bulgaria or Denmark. These were the results of local and national factors. And I want to spend some time setting up the dynamics to help us understand the devastation of Salonika itself. One of the major ruptures was the transfer of Salonika from Ottoman to Greek rule during the context of the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913, where the multicultural pluralistic realm of the Ottoman Empire, in which Jews were predominant in Salonika, was transformed into the context of an emergent ethno-nationalist state, the nation state, which is a new idea really that crystallizes in the 19th century. And the term, by the way, the nation state, the idea that that people should be organized in discrete nations within homogeneous political borders, one person, one people, one language, one religion, one past, one future. The European concept of the nation state was completely foreign to this part of the world. It was foreign to what is now Greece, foreign to what is now Turkey, foreign to what is now Israel, foreign to what is now Iraq, foreign to all of the realms of the former Ottoman Empire, in which plurality and multiple communities living together was the norm. Now, instead, we have a new geopolitical entity that will dominate the space, the nation state. So if you are not part of that dominant group, you don't speak the dominant language, you don't participate in the dominant religion, you have a different sense of your past, what will your future be in the framework of a nation state? Some Jewish leaders in Salonika immediately recognized the challenges that living in the context of a nation state, and a Greek nation state in particular, would impose upon them. So fascinatingly enough, in a kind of counterfactual imaginary scenario, they propose actually transforming Salonika into an autonomous Jewish city-statelet. And this idea of making Salonika a Jewish state was even discussed in the pages of the New York Times. And the logic was as following. Look, you see, suggestion for Jewish autonomy in Salonika and Palestine under the guarantee of the nations as a solution for the problems arising from the Balkan-Turkish Wars, the Balkan Wars, and complications in Asia Minor, in Turkey. It's like the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. What are we going to do here? And the article goes on to say, look, creating a Jewish state in Salonika makes just as much sense, if not more sense, than creating a Jewish state in Palestine. There are more Jews in Salonika than all of Palestine, essentially, at this time. And Jews are more predominant among the demographic segments of society, and they already have long-standing and robust Jewish institutions. Now, of course, as we know, there was no Jewish state established in Salonika, and instead, the city came under Greek control, and it began a process of nationalization, of Hellenizing, of transforming what had been Ottoman and Jewish Salonika into Greek Thessaloniki. And some major moments mark this transition. One being a fire in 1917, and here's a representation of it by my own father, which burnt down the center of the city, left over 70,000 people homeless, 52,000 of whom were Jews. It destroyed numerous synagogues, several dozen synagogues, Jewish schools, institutions, and radically transformed the urban fabric, the landscape of the city. Because what did it do is it forced the victims of the fire, most of whom were Jews, to move outside of the city center. And the city would expand, and the urban geography, we're going to come back to the way that that would have a dramatic impact once the war came. So Jews are being pushed out of the center of the city. Another transformation comes in the wake of World War I, during which not only did the fire in Salonika destroy the city, but in the remnant of the Ottoman Empire, in the process of its own Turkification, of transforming the Ottoman state into a Turkish state, or perhaps in an effort to save the last vestiges of the Ottoman state, initiated the mass murder of the Armenian population of the Ottoman Empire, with over 1 million Armenians killed in an incident that is understood now as the Armenian genocide. This is not the end of the story. The Salonika and the surrounding region would be engulfed by war, not just World War I. We had the Balkan Wars, we have World War I. Now there's another war between Greece and Turkey as the two countries battle over territory. Who is going to have what terrain? Greece wants to expand and retake Constantinople, which had been the capital of the Byzantine Empire. Turkey wants to prevent that from happening. And we have this war from Greece and Turkey. Greece loses, it's called the Great Catastrophe. Turkey wins, it's called the Turkish War of Independence. Out of this war are born both the Republic of Turkey and the Hellenic Republic. And one of the constitutive formative moments in that conflict is a compulsory exchange of populations, by which we mean an internationally sanctioned ethnic cleansing, according to which 1.5 million Orthodox Christians were expelled from Turkey and sent expelled from Turkey and sent to Greece, and 500,000 Muslims are expelled from Greece and sent to Turkey. What this does is it radically transforms the demography of these two societies. And the Greek state settles the Orthodox Christian refugees disproportionately in the area of Salonika and the environments to transform the demographic makeup definitively. And for the first time, Jews are no longer the dominant ethnic group in the city. Ladino is no longer the dominant language. The Sabbath is no longer officially, essentially observed on the Jewish Sabbath of Shabbat. So these are some of the transformations. You can see the process of nationalization, which is not unique to Greece, but it has a very dramatic impact in this city. But the Jews of Salonika do not disappear. They do not cower, but rather they engage in robust debate and discussion over what their future will be in the city and whether there will be opportunities for them to adapt to their newfound environment. The Jewish community continues to operate, and it has special legal status even in Greece. So that the Jewish community, and this is unique in Europe at the time, is an officially recognized legal entity. So if you're Jewish, you are compulsory, by compulsion, a member of the Jewish community of Salonika. Okay, and you are subject to the rulings of the rabbis. It's like it retains sort of like almost an old school medieval complete Jewish cohesion in a way that doesn't exist in other parts of Europe, but a cohesion that is also punctured by fractures, because the Jewish community has its own elected parliament that governs its institutions, and between the world wars, there are no fewer than 10 Jewish political parties active in Salonika, with secular Zionists, religious Zionists, socialists, communists, local diaspora nationalists. There's even a Jewish fascist group that never gets enough votes to get into parliament, but you get a sense of the range, okay? And we can see it visually represented in this fascinating postcard from the 1920s of a Jewish orphanage in Salonika, okay? So what is going on here? We can see the different identities reflected in the postcard. It's for the Jewish New Year, and it says, Tisku Leshanim Rabot, which is the Sephardic Hebrew greeting for the Jewish New Year. And then it says the name of the orphanage is in Ladino, in Hebrew characters, Orfanato de Ijas Mayaraboav. And then it says the date in the Hebrew calendar with a Magen David, a Star of David, and the word Zion reflected inside, 5687, which is 1926. The organizers of this particular orphanage were associated with the Zionist movement, and so that explains this iconography. But we have here in bigger font the name of the orphanage in Greek. Well, we're Greek, so we're Sephardic Jewish, we're Zionist, we're Greek, and we're European. That's what the French means. And we're rooted right here in the city. Here is Thessaloniki. And we are bicultural, we could say. On the blackboard in the back, it says teacher in Greek and in Ladino, in the special Sephardic Hebrew script, solitreo. And once again, we are rooted here in the city. This is where we are. The teacher is pointing to a map of Greece and Turkey, and she's pointing specifically to the city of Salonika itself. For Jews in this period, embracing all of these identities, Jewish but specifically Sephardic, rooted in Greece and more broadly in Europe, and specifically in the city of Thessaloniki, displaying a variety of ideological dispositions, there was no conflict, there's no contradiction. This was what it meant to be Jewish in a moment of transition from the Ottoman Empire to modern Greece. Okay? Accompanying these transformations were also economic downturns, political instability, and even violence. One of the other defining characteristics of Salonika was that it had never experienced a pogrom, popular anti-Jewish violence, until the Great Depression of 1931, where a group of refugees who had come from Turkey, the Christian refugees, many of whom actually didn't even speak Greek. They spoke Turkish, and they were told, here, you're back in your homeland, Greece. And they come to Greece and say, wait, why are there a bunch of Jews speaking Ladino? This is not Greece. Conflict emerges, especially among the most marginalized of both communities. And the first organized anti-Jewish violence against the Jews of Salonika is perpetrated in the context of the Great Depression in 1931. And the headline of the Ladino press the next day uses the word pogrom, has to explain it to its readers, and says, are we Zhytomyr or Kishinev? These are the capitals of the pogrom of the early 20th century, a concept completely foreign to this environment. But Jews do not give up. Some emigrate, they disperse to the extent that they can. Quotas in the United States prevent many from entering this country, but some had come earlier. Some go to France. Many of them were French-oriented, as we saw. Some will go to Mandate Palestine. But the Jewish community continues to operate, and it is embedded in broader Jewish networks. And during my research, one of the most fascinating documents I found was this one here, which is from 1940. And it is a document that describes the ritual items that are required for the observance of the Jewish holiday of Sukkot, the harvest festival of the autumn. And it describes here sending lulavim and etrogim and hadas to the Jewish communities of Poland. And it instructs here to send from Krakow, among the shipment from Salonika, these ritual objects, a portion of which should be distributed to the Jewish community of a town known as Auschwitz in Polish, but had just been occupied by Germany and now had a new name, Auschwitz. And there was a small Jewish community in Auschwitz before it became what we know of it today. It is likely that the last time the Jews of Auschwitz were able to celebrate the holiday of Sukkot, it was thanks exclusively to the availability of the ritual objects that they received from the Jews of Salonika. And even as the war has underway in Europe, begins in 1939, in Greece it's a different story. The war has not yet come this way, but eventually it does, with Italy invading in 1940. And the Greeks are able to repel that invasion, and right on the eve of the German entry into Greece in April 1941, which Salonika would be occupied, the Jews of the city do something phenomenal, remarkable, is they publish a new prayer book, Sha'arei Tefillah, Gates of Prayer. And they describe how the Jewish community is rooted in the city, and we need to educate our youth according to our customs. We anticipate Jewish life continuing and thriving here for generations to come. What they do on the inside front cover is they dedicate the Siddur, the prayer book, in Ladino, not in Greek. In Ladino, it's a message to themselves. En memoria del siempre regretado Shabbatai Amri Rafael Angel, caído en el campo de batalla por nuestra querida patria la Grecia. It is a book, a prayer book, dedicated in the memory of a fallen Jewish soldier who died defending our beloved homeland, Greece. We are here, rooted in Greece. We will remain here in Greece. Little could they fathom what would transpire in just a few weeks. Greece would be divided into 3 zones of occupation, and the Italian zone in blue and the Bulgarian zone in green are fascinating tales, and we don't have the opportunity to get into that in depth. The dark blue part here, Rhodes and the Dodecanese, I alluded to earlier. But essentially what happens in the Italian zone, Jews have a much greater rate of survival, in Athens at least, but not everywhere. Yanina, in which there were only Greek-speaking Jews, a small community in the Italian zone of occupation, completely decimated. In the Bulgarian zone, it is not the Germans who orchestrate the deportation of the Jews, but rather the Bulgarian police. Bulgaria has a very good reputation. They save their own Jews, that is true, but they went out of their way to remove and deport the Greek Jews from Bulgarian-occupied Thrace, sent them directly to their deaths at Treblinka. We're going to focus on the red part, Thessaloniki, because this was the Jewish capital of the country, and it is where most of the Jews lived and where our story is centered. It is not until the summer of 1942 when the first major anti-Jewish action takes place in the city, during which Jewish men, on a day since known as the Black Sabbath, are ordered to convene in a central square of the city. Adjacent to the spot, it is known as Liberty Square because this is actually where the Constitution for the entire Ottoman Empire had been proclaimed in 1908. So the ideas of liberté, égalité, fraternité that entered into the Muslim world, that were celebrated not only in Salonica, but in Istanbul and Jerusalem and Baghdad, that began in Salonica. And it is that same spot where the Constitution had been proclaimed, where those same rights of citizenship would be revoked by the Nazi occupation forces. And you can see from the secret diary kept by Yom Tov Yakoel, who was the Jewish community lawyer, not only was this a devastating moment because the Jewish men were siphoned away from their families and humiliated under the hot summer sun on a Sabbath day, no less, but he observes the way in which the Aryan Greek population, in other words, the Orthodox Christian population, observed the beginning of the dispossession of their Jewish neighbors. These young Jewish men are sent off to forced labor to work on German war munitions, mines, railroads, under terrible conditions, and quite a number of them perish as a result. As part of a process of the next steps as it relates to what's going to happen to those workers, a very fascinating and devastating moment transpires in the history of the city. Remember, I mentioned that after the fire during World War I, the city expanded outside of its old city limits? Well, what was sitting just beyond the old city walls was the Jewish cemetery of Salonika, which by the time of the Second World War had become the center of new Greek Thessaloniki. This was a problem for Greek nationalists. How could you have a Jewish monument in the center of what was supposed to be a Greek Orthodox Christian city? Thessaloniki was emerging as the second city of Greece after Athens. And so it became coveted land. Already at this time, you can see this is the original building of the University of Thessaloniki, the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, overlooking the cemetery. And Greek officials long coveted that land. They hoped to expropriate the land and to make way for an expansion of the university. You could even see this being discussed in the 30s before the war began. Here it is in the Greek press, an important matter for the city. The space of the Jewish monuments will be given as quickly as possible to the city and the university. But the Jewish community remained strong enough that it could repel most of the efforts to expropriate the Jewish cemetery. That changed under the context of the German occupation when it was the local Greek officials, not the Germans, the local Greek officials, the leadership of the university, the leadership of the Chamber of Commerce, the leadership of the municipality that proposed to the Nazi occupation forces to expropriate the Jewish cemetery. I want to make clear what we're talking about here. This is not just any Jewish cemetery. This was the largest Jewish cemetery in continental Europe. I'm going to say that again. The largest Jewish burial ground on the continent of Europe. It was the size of over 80 football fields and had 350,000 graves, in some cases going back to ancient times, the majority of which were after 1492. You can see here the building of the university, how far it extends outward. Again, at the initiative of local authorities, with the partial permission of the Germans, who were like, you really want to destroy it all? Why don't you? The Nazis propose preserving the oldest graves of those Jews who came after 1492, but the local authorities ignore that advice and instead destroy the whole thing. Marble floods the market and become used as building material all across the city to pave streets, to line latrines, to build houses. build a swimming pool with the inscriptions facing out, to beautify and repair churches, such as the St. Demetrius Church, which was the patron saint of the city. This church had been damaged by the fire of 1917. Tombstones were used to repair it now, over 30 years later. And most of all, the tombstones and the land of the university were used to build, the land of the cemetery was used to build the extension of the University of Thessaloniki. If you go to Thessaloniki today, the entirety of the university sits atop what once had been the largest Jewish burial ground in Europe. The fate of the space of the dead in some ways foreshadowed the fate of the living. In the spring of 1943, the deportations of the Jews from Salonica begin, orchestrated by the same Nazi officials who had previously orchestrated the deportation of the Jews from Vienna. They arrive in Thessaloniki and they orchestrate the roundup of the Jews. They're confiscating their properties and confining them to ghettos. This photograph is one of the few photographs, like family photographs from this era, of a Jewish family wearing the yellow Star of David. What is so profound about this photograph, I find, are the smiles of the two young women, because they do not know, they cannot anticipate what fate lies in store for them. The Jews of Thessaloniki are deported from March to August of 1943 in 19 train loads, all of which go to Auschwitz, with the exception of one that goes to Bergen-Belsen. These were Jews who were considered privileged, members of the Judenrat, and some Jews with Spanish nationality who had the privilege of going to Bergen-Belsen rather than Auschwitz. About 20 to 25% of the city of Thessaloniki, its residents, disappear within a few months. Theo Salomon, I would discover in the letters, and his family would be on the second to last of these shipments. They stayed behind so long because, according to the letters, Theo Salomon was put in charge of distributing milk and yogurt to the elderly and the sick as they boarded the trains to Poland. One of the distinct features of the Jews of Salonika, as part of the deceit of the Nazi occupation forces, was that they were being told that they were being relocated to Poland. And, if you think about it in the mind of the context here, this is a space that has gone through many different demographic shifts. It had been 20 years before the Muslims and the Christians that were moving spaces. Well, maybe now it's the time for the Jews. And in order to make it convincing, one of the other unique features of the experience of the Jews of Salonika was they were the only ones who were forced to pay for their tickets to Auschwitz, their train tickets to Auschwitz. They were not told that is where they were going. In one unique phenomenon in the history of the Holocaust, it is also the Greek archbishop in Athens, Damaskinos, who intervenes and makes a public plea, risking his own life, to demand that the deportations of the Jews of Salonika cease. He says, quoting Apostle Paul, who preached in Thessalonica in the first century, "There's neither Jew nor Greek. We're all together in the Greek homeland." It is a public announcement, protest. Many intellectuals and political figures in Athens sign on, support this statement. How many in Thessaloniki itself oppose the deportation of the Jews of Salonika and sign on to Damaskinos? None. None. The voyage to Auschwitz by train takes a week in packed cattle cars. And a survivor, David Chaim, composed a song about the experience, which he set to an Ottoman Turkish makam or tune. 7 días encerrados, which I'll read for you. 7 días encerrados en vagones de behemas, Una vez a los 3 días nos quitaban a airear. Madre mía, mi querida, ya tuviste el zehut de morirte en tus tierras y no pasates por el luc. Padre mío, mi querido, ¿quién te lo voy a decir? Que vinieras con tu hermano al crematorio de Auschwitz. Padre y madre, hermanos y hermanicos, saliendo todos reyagís. El patrón del mundo, que envíe salud a mí, que me quite de estos campos para vos echar Kadish. Why does David Chaim want to survive? It is not to see his stuff. It is not to see his home. It is not to see the sea. It is not even to see his family. It is to recite the Kaddish, to recite appropriately the memorial prayer. In Auschwitz, the Jews of Salonika and Greece more generally would gain a very fascinating image and aura. They could not speak Yiddish. They could not speak German. They could not speak Polish. They were isolated. Primo Levi describes them. Next to us, using, by the way, some Orientalist kind of language, there is a group of Greeks, those admirable and terrible Jews of Salonika, tenacious, thieving, wise, ferocious, and united, so determined to live, such pitiless opponents in the struggle for life. Those Greeks who have conquered in the kitchens and in the yards, and whom even the Germans respect and the Poles fear. They are in their 3rd year of the camp, and nobody knows better than they what the camp means. They now stand closely in a circle, shoulder to shoulder, and sing one of their interminable chants. Notice he describes them as Greeks. They were so Greek in Greece itself that nobody lifted a finger when they were being deported. None of the neighbors intervened. But now abroad, in Auschwitz, on the verge of their deaths, here they are as Greeks. And what is that interminable chant that they are singing? Is it in Ladino? Is it in Greek? The isolation of the Jews from Salonika, and I'm coming to the end here, contributed to them being disproportionately selected for the most gruesome task in all of Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was the work of the Sonderkommando. This was the brigade of Jewish prisoners that were responsible for escorting victims to the gas chambers and extracting the corpses, the mangled corpses, from the gas chambers and incinerating them in the crematoria. The Jews of Salonika, even though they had no language with which they could communicate with other prisoners, save perhaps they could find somebody who spoke French, maybe Italian, they participated in and helped organize the only uprising in Auschwitz-Birkenau in October of 1944, at that very end of the war, in which they succeeded in blowing up one of the crematoria and killing a few SS officers. And as the Jews of Greece are rounded up, those who participated in the Sonderkommando uprising, and they are about to be executed, each with a bullet to the head, what do? According to the memoirs of those who survived, we understand that they began to sing a song. And what do they sing? The Greek national anthem. Why? Why did they sing the Greek national anthem? They had been excised from their country, stripped away. Their neighbors did not lift a finger to intervene. Yet here they are. Some of them included Greek war veterans, some of whom perhaps were restoring to themselves in a final moment a sense of their own humanity. Over 95% of the Jews of Salonika would be exterminated during the Holocaust, whereas they constituted 50% of the population at the beginning of the 20th century. Today, they constitute approximately 1,000 in a city of over 1 million. While there were 56 synagogues on the eve of the war, today only one of those pre-war synagogues remains. I'd like to make clear once again our understanding, hopefully, of the impact of the Holocaust, the devastation of the Holocaust, is much enriched when we recognize the story from the Mediterranean and we see the experience from the place of Salonika itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devin, for this most outstanding presentation. Just truly remarkable. We have a couple of questions in our last few minutes, and one of them really deals with how, in the area of Greece today, what is the memory of Jews like? Like, what does it feel like there if you were to go visit today?
I would say the memory has been transformed in the public space over the last couple of decades tremendously. There was essentially silence until the 1990s, where there began to become some chatter. The first Holocaust memorial was established in 1997, but far out from the center of the city. It was really not until um, uh, the 2000s, under the mayorship of the late mayor Yanis Boutaris, who just died a couple of weeks ago, actually, who was a progressive, was open-minded, and wanted to restore to the city a sense of both its Jewish and its Muslim heritage. And so he began to put out some identifying features of important spaces across the city. And there was also him in collaboration with the president of the Jewish community of Salonica, David Saltiel, who's still the president of the community, where they established for the first time in 2014 a monument at the university acknowledging that the Jewish cemetery once stood there. But there were limits, of course, to what could be said. The monument itself indicates that the Jewish cemetery was destroyed by the Nazis and their collaborators, which is not the case. It was initiated by the local authorities. And I remember speaking to the leaders of the Jewish community about this. I said, well, you know very well that the Nazis did not initiate the destruction of the Jewish cemetery. You go to Berlin, Jewish cemetery is sitting in the middle of Berlin right now. You go all over occupied Europe. The Nazis were primarily interested in murdering living Jews, not destroying their cemeteries. So why do you accept the language? And I remember being told, Professor Naar, we are in a political position as the leader of the Jewish community. We're politicians. We have to live here. We have to make do with the environment of our neighbors. You have the privilege, as a historian who lives abroad, of being able to tell the truth.
Interesting and very powerful. Devin, there's another question here from Emily who asks, what is the story of your relatives who remained?
They were all killed. They were all killed on the second to last deportation. I mean, my immediate family. I mean, what I found out also my research was that there were 400 people with the name Naar in Salonica before the war. There's one family left. We haven't been able to determine exactly the connection, but my great uncle, his wife, and two children were all murdered in Auschwitz in 1943, and the letters describe the circumstances of their death. That the wife and the young boy who was preparing for his bar mitzvah at the time of his deportation were immediately selected and murdered in the gas chambers, whereas Uncle Solomon and his daughter Shelley were put in the work camps, and they were apparently able to bribe some guards so they could have one final meeting and an embrace, and shortly thereafter they were each sent to the gas chambers.
So Janet Wolf has another question here, and she asks, the Jewish cemetery in Rhodes is still there. Can you explain why? Is it because it was under Italian rule?
Excellent question. The Jewish cemetery in Rhodes is kind of still there. The Italians successfully expropriated it and moved it to a different location. So in other words, according to Jewish law, it is forbidden to unbury the dead, even if a grave is desecrated, with only essentially one exception. You can unbury remains and transfer them to Eretz Israel, to the Holy Land. But other than that, you're not allowed to touch the remains of the dead. They have to remain where they are. The Jewish community of Rhodes was not as strong as the Jewish community of Salonica. The Jewish community of Rhodes could not protest against the Italian fascist regime that undug everything and transferred it to another location in 1938. Ironically, that's how the cemetery survived in its new location, whereas the Jewish community of Salonika persisted on, although this was highly debated. The traditionalists were saying you cannot uproot the cemetery. The liberals were like, well, they're going to destroy it. We might as well do it on our own terms and move it. They lost. And that's why the Jewish cemetery in Salonika was destroyed, and why the Jewish cemetery in Rhodes was not preserved so much as it was uprooted and transplanted somewhere else. So it is preserved in a certain sense in a new location due to the power of the Italian colonial forces.
So, Devin, there's one last question just in our last couple minutes here, which a number of people have asked, and that is about Ladino. And there are a number of people who want to know, is it still spoken today? Where is it spoken? And how is it used?
There is not a single family in the world in which Ladino remains the primary language. There are no children being spoken to in the language organically. There are no schools where you can learn Ladino from elementary school moving forward. Ladino remains a language of the older generations. So in Seattle, for example, if you're Sephardic and maybe over 80 years old, maybe you can speak. If you're over 90, maybe you can carry on a conversation. The same can be said for Turkey, Greece, even Israel, where there are Ladino-speaking communities. But the processes of the nation state impacted all of these places. So in Greece, speak Greek. In the United States, you speak English. In Turkey, you speak Turkish. In Israel, speak Hebrew. Ladino did not necessarily have better fate in Israel than it did anywhere else. And so what is the future of Ladino? It is a language that is preserved among families for song, sometimes in the synagogue for prayer, for foods, which is the last piece to go, and at the university. So University of Washington is one of the few universities in the country where you can take a Ladino class. So those of you who are local, if you're interested in taking a Ladino class, we have a new colleague of mine who is from Izmir, from Turkey herself, and speaks like 12 languages, Ladino being one of them, Janan Bolel. If you'd like to take a Ladino class, I strongly encourage you to do that or get in touch with me, and there are resources that are out there. I attempted for the first 5 years of my older son's life, he's now 9, I spoke to him only in Ladino. Very hard. Very hard. The pandemic actually helped, but there are no cartoons, there are no movies, there are no materials to really live a life of a child in Ladino, and no peers. So really the entrance to public school, just like for my grandparents' generation, public school destroyed the language of immigration, stigmatized in many ways. Same thing happened in Seattle in the 21st century. So I'm trying, but it's really an uphill battle.
That is impressive and noble. So can he speak it? So now that he's 9, can he speak it?
He does not speak it anymore. I think he can, but he doesn't. He understands very well. And the utility of that, he also understands Spanish very well now too. And he also understands the way in which the Ladino language is connected to other languages and cultures, because if you think about it, it's a Spanish-based language spoken by Jews, historically written in Hebrew letters that flourished in the Muslim world. I remember we were having a conversation with a friend of mine from Pakistan who speaks Urdu. And within 20 minutes, my son and him found a word in common between Ladino and Urdu, which was the result of this is the language trajectory. Ladino, Turkish, Arabic, Farsi, Urdu is the same word in all of those languages, shalvar, which means loose trousers. So I think Ladino actually has a lot of power in our day and age where, the world is increasingly divided off from each other. We're living in a world of borders and walls. Here we have a bridge.
Well, maybe that's our motivation to resurrect it.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Devin, thank you so much for being part of our Lunch and Learn program today, and just for this amazing, very informative presentation. Really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. Appreciate it. And feel free to be in touch. Anybody out there you want to get in touch, please feel free to do so. Okay.
Thank you. And thank you to so many of you for watching today's program today. Our next Lunch and Learn program in the new year is on January 14th, where we will hear the remarkable story of Basia Lemberger, who beat the odds with her survival of several labor camps over the course of 5 years. And her story is told by her daughter, Beth Littman, a member of our Speakers Bureau. And be sure to mark your calendars for Sunday, January 26th, to attend our annual International Holocaust Remembrance Day program. It's going to be at the Museum of Flight. The pianist Roger Peltzman will perform his one-person show called Dedication, which recounts his family's history fleeing the Nazis, and he uses drama, humor, images, and musical performances, everything from blues to Chopin. So you can register now on our website, and we hope to see you there. All of this work that we do at the Holocaust Center would not be possible without our outstanding team. Special thanks to Richard Green, my co-pilot, who is working behind the scenes on this program. And thank you to our entire team, interim CEO Lynn Smith, Jessica Michaels, Paul Regelbrug, Branda Anderson, Lori Werschel-Cohen, Lexi Jason, Charlotte Campbell, Lisa Spink, Michael Langberg, Liz Hall, Arlene Lugtu, Jess Alley, Mario Felipe Bamonte, and Rosa Campos. Thank you also to the Conference on Material Claims Against Germany for their support of this program, and to all of you for watching today. And I look forward to seeing you at our next Lunch and Learn program in January. Thank you, and this concludes our program for today.